You may be a little puzzled, I realize. When talking about our first family of religions, I spent the bulk of my time telling you about Hinduism. I did mention, of course, that Buddhism too began in South Asia, but I used that religion mainly as a vehicle for transporting us to East Asia. Now things seem to have changed. This is our third session on our second family of religions, and we're already talking about a third religion. Having touched on Buddhism and Confucianism, we're now into Daoism. So what's going on? Why are we going so much faster now? Why isn't Dr. Cutzinger, you might be wondering, staying more focused? Well, let me try to explain the method to my madness. In an introductory survey of comparative religion, I think it's important to do two things. On the one hand, it's my job to give you at least some sense of the range of religious beliefs and practices. And that, of course, means talking about several different religions. But I don't like to talk about so many religions that there's no time to dig down a bit and get a fuller, more nuanced picture of a few religions. So, having distinguished four principal families or groups, in each case, my overall plan in the course is to focus on one representative religion within that grouping. In the case of South Asia, Hinduism, the dominant religion in that part of the world, was the obvious choice. When we turn to the West, we'll touch briefly on Judaism, but my focus is going to be Islam. And then finally, when we get to the primal religions, rather than spreading myself thin by trying to speak about everything, from Aborigines in Australia to Eskimos in Alaska to sub-Saharan African tribal peoples, I'll spend most of my time with the primal category on the religion of the American Plains Indians. In East Asia, however, as I mentioned already in Paths of Return, the way religion is practiced makes it impossible to single out any one particular traditional strand for an exclusive focus or emphasis. Because in that part of the world, it's not only possible to practice multiple religions at the same time, it's the norm. Hence, my somewhat different approach in this module, which is to try to cast a little light on each of the facets of that gem which is East Asian religion. You've probably been asked, maybe you yourself ask other people, maybe you just ask yourself, what must I do to be saved? I'm calling this the question of questions. What must I do to be saved? I'm actually quoting from the Christian New Testament, the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 16, verse 30. There are a number of possible answers to that question, right? Depending on what religion we look at. If you're a Christian, you may respond, the way I'm saved is by believing on the Lord Jesus Christ. In fact, that's the very next verse in Acts 16. What should I do to be saved? Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. Or again, in Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 2, he summarizes the path to salvation this way: work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So Christians say salvation is a matter of both faith and works, working together in some way. We've seen various Hindu answers, right, to the question, what do I do to be saved? If you're following the Bhakti Marga, the path of love and devotion, the answer is, well, love God. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you're following the path of knowledge, Jnana Marga, pierce the veil of Maya with the arrow of knowledge, might be the advice you would get. Karma Marga, the way of good works, well, perform selfless deeds. What about if you're a yogi? What if your path is the Raja Marga, the royal path? Well, the answer would be, how do I be saved? Sit, breathe, invoke, meditate. Buddhism sort of makes it simple. Follow the Noble Eightfold Path if you wish to be saved. How about Confucianism, which we talked about last time? Here's the answer, I suppose, in a nutshell. Cultivate Ren being empathy, compassion, right? Human-heartedness. Cultivate that virtue by observing Li, good comportment, social etiquette in all your relationships, and you'll be saved. So that would be a Confucian answer to the question we've posed ourselves. All right, what about the religion that we're going to be talking about now today? What about Taoism? I think if you say to the Taoist, what must I do? The Taoist is going to say, don't. Stop doing. You should do without doing. You should just be. Repose in the awareness that you are already saved. I've got my stop doing list here to emblemize Taoism. Now, there'd be more to it than this. There is more to it than this. But I think this cuts to the heart of a lot of the Taoist teaching we're going to be talking about now here today in this YouTube lecture. Taoism, as you know, I've explained this now a couple of times, can be construed as one half, one part, one puzzle part of the Chinese tradition. The esoteric half or part, the inward dimension, the contemplative part, corresponding to the Confucian part, which is more exoteric and outward and more focused on social relationship. The point of my image here is to say we could also think of Daoism and Confucianism as two sides of a Mobius strip. Do you know that term, Mobius? A Mobius strip is this topological figure that you see in front of you here. Take a strip of paper. Try this yourself. Take a strip of paper if you've never done this before. Oh, I don't know. A foot long, 18 inches long, something like that. Twist it just once, and then circle it around and connect the ends together with some Scotch tape or some glue or whatever. Then if you take a pencil and start drawing on one side of that strip, just keep moving along the center, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, it'll actually turn out that you're on the other side of the strip without turning it over. It's an interesting little, I don't know what to call it, a geometric puzzle of sorts. Try that sometime. So I've got Taoism and Confucianism here as two sides of this Mobius strip, suggesting that if you continue down the Confucian path, you end up on the Taoist side, and if you continue on the Taoist side, you end up on the Confucian side. So closely are these two religions related. Really one tradition, two parts. Where does it come from? Well, we've got this guy, Laozi. We don't know his name. Laozi just means the old guy. The elderly fellow. By extension, it means someone who's wise. We really don't know for sure, but we think he might have been born around 600 BC. The question mark there is to say, and who knows? When he died, whether he died. Hardcore Taoists say he probably didn't die. He's actually still alive, maybe hiding somewhere or elusively moving amongst us, and we can't even see him. Laozi, I described in Paths of Return, was mystery through and through. We're told that when he was born, his birth was accompanied by a falling star. We're told, and don't ask me to make sense of this, I don't know what it means, we're told that he was 62 years old when he was born. Okay. Kind of like the Mysterious Life of Benjamin Button, or whatever that film was called, where the guy begins old and he ages backwards, maybe. Laozi apparently could fly. It had all sorts of miraculous, prodigious powers and so forth. The rest of the slide here is just to pick up on something that I said in the lecture you read, kind of a tangent, a bit of a discursus, I realize, but an interesting one, I think. I pointed out that Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, Confucius, the founder of Confucianism, Laozi, now the founder of Taoism, all were roughly contemporaries, maybe not quite, but it seems that they probably overlapped at least somewhat. Also alive at that same point in history were the ancient Jewish prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah, prophets that one finds in the Christian Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Also alive, roughly, now again, not exactly, and maybe they didn't quite overlap, but more or less the same period, a number of very important ancient Greek philosophers, Parmenides, Pythagoras, Heraclitus I've mentioned before, Socrates I've mentioned before. We also think in India the rishis, we call them, the seers who transcribed and wrote down in text what they had seen in the wisdom of what's called the Akashic record sometimes. The result of their transcription were the scriptures of the Upanishads. We've talked about the Upanishads with Hinduism. They probably lived roughly at the same time as well. And maybe Zoroaster, the ancient founder of Zoroastrianism. Some scholars say, no, he was a lot older than that. But others say, no, he was probably alive also in Persia around this time. Karl Jaspers, German philosopher, historian, 20th century, mid-20th century, wrote a book called The Origin and Goal of History. And he was very interested in this synchronicity too, and talked about this being what he called the axial age, when so many different religious and philosophical figures were alive at roughly the same time. Just an interesting fact about the history of the world, religiously and philosophically speaking. Well, there's Lao Tzu. Traditional image of Lao Tzu. I guess he's on his water buffalo. Remember I told you the story in Paths of Return, how he was heading off to abandon society, going off maybe to a different country or exiting the world altogether, when he was stopped and asked to write down his wisdom. Well, there he is on his water buffalo, I guess. All right, well, what did he write down? He wrote down what we call the Tao Te Ching. I show you two different transcriptions, transliterations of that, Taote, and then Ching. And then also you'll see sometimes Tao Te Ching written as one word. Really, the first letter is more like our D, and the CH is more like our J. And there's a whole complex issue of how you transliterate languages. I won't go into all that right now. What it means is the Tao Te Book. Ching or Jing means book, and then it's the book of the Tao and the Da. So let's go over these terms once again. What's the Tao? Well, the Tao Te Ching begins by telling you that it can't tell you what the Tao is. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. All right, so we start right off the bat with this puzzle and paradox. I pointed out in Paths of Return, the Tao, obviously, is very much like Nirguna Brahman in Hindu theology and Nirvana in Buddhism. Remember Nirguna Brahman, the ultimate, supreme, absolute principle about which we can say zero, except Tat, that it's there, right? Nirvana is that place that you go when the flame is blown out, and about which we can say only not, nor, neither sorts of things. Remember Nirvana? Well, the Tao is like that. It can't be described in positive imagery in a way that really makes any sense to our meager conceptual apparatus. It's beyond all of that. The last line on this slide, I make a distinction, as Christian philosophers and religious thinkers do, between two kinds of theologies, cataphatic and apophatic. A cataphatic theological statement is an affirmative statement where you say something true about God. An apophatic or negative theological statement is one in which you take it all back, in which you say, well, yeah, that's true, but not true in a way that we can understand. So, cataphatically speaking, God is good, God is just, God is merciful, God is wise, etc., etc. But the apophatic theological statement says, yeah, but his goodness is not what we mean by goodness. His justice is not the same thing that we mean by justice. His wisdom so far surpasses our wisdom that by comparison it might look to us like stupidity, right? It's totally different, totally different. So the apophatic theological importance of apophatic theology is being seen here in these other traditions, in Tao, in Nirguna Brahman, in Nirvana. Very famous, very influential, very, very important Christian saint and theologian Maximus the Confessor was a super-duper apophatic type of theological thinker, said all kinds of things about God in order to underscore that you really can't say anything about God ultimately. He said that God, I love this, is supra-non-knowable and can be known only by an act of supra-non-knowing. That's bizarre. It's not just that God is non-knowable. You can't know God if he's non-knowable. He's supra-non-knowable. He goes beyond even being non-knowable. But curiously in such a way that you can actually engage with God if you're able to act in a supra-non-knowing kind of way. Well, that's kind of the Christian equivalent then of Taoist vocabulary. Talking about the Tao is you can't really talk about the Tao. You can't name the true Tao. Here's the Chinese ideogram character for the Tao that you would actually find in Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. As I may have mentioned before, Chinese ideograms were originally pictograms. That is to say, they were little sort of like stylized pictures of the things you were talking about. And then Chinese has over the centuries developed in such a way that the picture is not obviously what it originally was. It's been sort of streamlined a little bit or refined in a way. Let me break this down into parts for you. It's really interesting. So over here on this side, this part of the ideogram means to go, or to move, or to step. I guess you could sort of say, here's a little person. There's one of his legs, and the other leg is stretching out. It's moving, it's going, it's stepping forward. This part of the ideogram has to do with a head, and I'm told this is hair up here on the head, and then I guess this is a face on the head. I'm not exactly sure about that, but the whole thing put together, I can tell you this for sure, means going ahead, putting your head out there and moving ahead. So literally, Tao, which I've described in Paths of Return as meaning something in English like way or path, it's not really so much the way as the movement along a way. It has a dynamic or a verbal dimension to it. Tao is going down a path. It's an activity more than just an entity. I talked in Paths of Return about the different dimensions of Tao, and I said that it has different aspects, dimensions. It's all one Tao, mind you, but you can describe it or look at it from different points of view. First of all, metaphysical. Metaphysically speaking, I said the Tao is, well, it's like God. It's like Brahman. It's like the supreme reality from which, as it were, everything flows. I thought I would quote myself here briefly from the Tao Te Ching, a few little brief quotations from different chapters in the Tao Te Ching that underscore these dimensions. So the metaphysical dimension, we could turn to chapter 25 of the Tao Te Ching, which says, and I quote, "There was something undefined and yet complete in itself, born before heaven and earth, silent and boundless, standing alone without change, yet pervading all without fail. It may be regarded as the mother of the world. I do not know its name. I style it Tao. And in the absence of a better word, I simply call it the Great." All right? Another brief quotation from the Tao Te Ching about the metaphysical dimension of Tao. We're told, quote, "Tao gave birth to the One. One gave birth to the Two. Two gave birth to the Three. And Three gave birth to all the myriad things." There's a kind of hierarchy there, right? So the Tao has a motherly quality, gives birth. What does it give birth to? It gives birth to one thing, which gave birth to two things, which gave birth to three things, and then from those three came all the creatures of the entire universe. So again, Tao is at the origin, at the top of the ladder from which everything comes down to this world, the metaphysical dimension of Tao. I said it also has an ecological, you could almost say an environmental dimension to it, inasmuch as Tao is the way or the path or the activity or the process, the dynamism that we see in the natural environment, in the harmony among creatures, and in the balance of the seasons and so forth. Again, just a little taste of the Tao Te Ching on that subject. The Tao Te Ching says, chapter 29, "Does anyone want to take the world and do what he wants with it? I do not see how he can succeed. The world is a sacred vessel which must not be tampered with or grabbed after. To tamper with it is to spoil it, and to grasp it is to lose it. For all things there is a time for going ahead, so for Tao, and a time also for following behind. A time for slow breathing, a time for fast breathing, a time for strength, a time for decay, a time to be up, and a time to be down. So that gives you a little sense of that dimension of Tao. Also, briefly here from chapter 34, the great Tao is universal like a flood. How can it be turned to the right or the left? All creatures depend on it. It denies nothing to anyone. It does its work, but it makes no claim for itself. It clothes and feeds all, but it does not lord it over them. All things return to it as their home, but it does not lord over them. It may be called the great. It is just because it does not wish to be great that its greatness is fully realized. And then thirdly, lastly, finally, there's an ethical, a moral, a political, a social dimension to Tao. Keep in mind, right, that Taoism, like Confucianism, is an East Asian religion, and there's an interest inevitably in society and social relationships. So in that light, with respect to this particular dimension, again, a quotation from the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching, by the way, has been said to be a kind of a manual for business executives or for leaders of any sort, because there's a lot in the Tao Te Ching about how to be a really good leader, a good ruler, a good executive. Here's an example in chapter 17. The highest type of ruler is one of whose existence the people are barely aware. Next comes one whom they love and praise. Next comes one whom they fear. Next comes one whom they despise and defy. When you are lacking in faith, others will be unfaithful to you. The sage is self-effacing and scanty of words. When his task is accomplished and things have been completed, all the people say, "We ourselves have achieved it." You see how much this is like the Confucian effacement as well. The true person, the noble person, the chunzi gets out of the way, disappears, as it were. It's a kind of disappearing act. You don't even know that he's there. Well, that's good leadership. The Tao Te Ching agrees. Or finally, chapter 22 on this same subject of ethics and politics. Bend, and you will be whole. Curl, and you will be straight. Keep empty, and you will be filled. Grow old, and you will be renewed. Have little, and you will gain. Have much, and you will be confused. Therefore the sage embraces the one and becomes a pattern to all under heaven. He does not make a show of himself, hence he shines. Does not justify himself, hence he becomes known. Does not boast of his ability, hence he gets the credit. Does not brandish success, he endures it. Does not compete with anyone, hence no one can compete with him. Indeed, the ancient saying, "Bend, and you will remain whole," is no idle word. Now, if you have really attained wholeness, everything and everyone will flock to you. All right, so a little taste of what goes on in the Tao Te Ching. I guess I should also here talk about the last part of this slide. The asterisk next to the metaphysical dimension of Tao brings us down and reminds you of what I said in Paths of Return, that Tao, in a sense, can be compared, at least in some ways, to the logos, L-O-G-O-S, or word of the prologue to the Gospel of John, which begins, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God." Well, the word in the Greek is logos, and it's sort of like what the Tao is, except that the Tao, which is feminine, is older than God. The Tao Te Ching says the Tao is actually older than God, whereas the Word, which is masculine, has a father who is greater than I. Jesus, as that Word in the Gospel of John, speaks of the Father as being greater than I. So parallels, but also differences. I mentioned Chinese translations of the Christian New Testament, the Gospel of John, the prologue in particular, substitute actually the word Tao for the word logos or word. So you see here, in the beginning was the Tao was with God, the Tao was God, and so forth. Over here, this is Tao. There's that character Tao. There's that character Dao. Come on down here. There's that character Dao again in this translation. Remember, Chinese is read down from right to left, down that column, and so on. So that's the beginning of John in Chinese. A friend of mine, I mentioned this quickly too, a monk, Hieromonk Damascene, has a wonderful little book, at least I find it to be very compelling and interesting, where he does a lot of comparison also between these traditions. And the book is called Christ, the Eternal Tao. You might want to check that out sometime. All right, let's look at the other word in the title, Dao De Jing, the book of the Dao and the De, T-E, De. What's that? What's going on here? Well, here's the Chinese character, ideogram for De. A little more complicated than Dao. So let me do my little analysis here. On this side, we've got this little part of the character here, and it means something again like move or step. Okay, it's a little more reduced than before, but it also means something like move or step. Up here at the top on this side, do you see this thing that looks like a cross almost? Vertical line, horizontal line. That means 4 directions. That's a symbol for all the 4 directions of space, north, south, east, and west. Okay? Down below that, where'd my cursor go? Down right in here, right here. That's a head, I guess. That's what I'm told. It's a face. Don't let me explain that. I can't explain it. And then down at the bottom, this part of the ideogram means heart. So we've got move, 4 directions, head, heart. What does that mean? Well, the analysis yields something like this. De means, analytically, to step in 4 directions with eyes and heart. So the head's eyes are being seen in that imagery. The eyes are looking out of that head I just showed you. The 4 directions imply some kind of completeness. So step in a way that you're moving completely, wholly, totally, nothing held back, with your eyes and your heart in some way joined. It's a flowing with no hesitation because the eyes are in the heart and the heart in the eyes. I've seen it explained this way too. If you wanted just one word, and people do try to translate this with one word, De means power. It means strength or virtue. And I remind you in parenthesis here, tell you if you didn't know it before, that the word virtue comes from the Latin word virtus, which means power or strength or stamina. So all of that's an aspect, all of those are different aspects of what De entails. A wholehearted, nothing held back, total movement, and without any hesitation, with total strength, because there's some kind of union between head and heart, eyes and heart, the eyes of the head and the heart. The eyes of the head have come down into the heart, in a sense. There's an eye of the heart, and you're looking with that as you move through your life. If you do that, you've got a lot of Da going for you. I compared Da to the circulation of blood in the body, and in particular to the systolic and diastolic phases of the heartbeat. Also to the tidal movement of ebb and flow and ebb and flow. We get the impression from the Tao Te Ching that this De, this movement, this powerful, strong, virtuous movement has a kind of pulsing action to it. Like the heart, boom, 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 or like the tides in and out and in and out. Well, that's the movement of De. And I thought in this connection again of Paul, Romans 11:36, where he talks about everything coming from God and moving through God and returning to God. From him and through him and to him are all things. That's sort of resonant, redolent maybe, of how the De functions and moves through this universe. All right. Talked about 3 kinds of Taoism, right? 3 schools. I spoke of a philosophical school, which focuses on what I called contemplative De, contemplative power or strength. A religious school, popular school of Taoism, which focuses on ritual, even magical De. And then a yogic kind aspect, dimension school of Taoism, focused primarily on physiological power. The first, the philosophical Taoist, I said, seeks, again, a kind of contemplative power, tries to pay close attention to the movements of animals and the creatures in nature, tries to tune in to the way that they flow, their spontaneity, their lack of inhibition, tunes himself into that in order in some way to imitate that in his own life. There's a fun little book called The Tao of Pooh, Pooh being Winnie the Pooh, the creation of A. Milne. And you look at the back of the book. I show you both the cover and the back of the book, where we're told that while Eeyore, the donkey, frets and Piglet hesitates and Rabbit calculates and Owl pontificates, Pooh just is. And that's a clue to the secret wisdom of the Taoists, we're told here. So, I mean, Pooh, if you know Winnie the Pooh, if you know the Winnie the Pooh stories, and in particular, if you read this particular book, Winnie's flying a kite with the Yin Yang symbol on it here, or Winnie the Pooh's flying this kite. If you read the book, and maybe better even go back to A. Milne's poems and read some of those poems, you'll get a sense of what the author is talking about here. Pooh just has this sort of relaxed, no hesitation, no anxiety approach to life, which is sort of like what the Taoist is seeking as he contemplates nature and watches the movements of animals. One other quick point before we go on to the next school. There's an interesting, controversial, kind of a renegade Cambridge University scientist, a biologist, named Rupert Sheldrake. And he has this theory, he calls it morphic resonance. He believes that animals have a kind of psychic capacity where they're able to tune into other animals, not just of their own species, but mainly, I guess, of their own species, and make contact and communicate with them across various distances, or at least without having to, make any sound or anything like that, a kind of mental engagement or communication. And he's done things like this. This is the reason my picture is here of these gulls on a beach. He's done slow motion photography, taken pictures of gulls, little flocks, bunches of gulls taking off after they're disturbed by a sound. And he claims, I'm not saying I can prove this, I'm not even sure I believe it exactly, but he claims that slow motion photography shows that gulls actually take off in unison. It's not like, one gull waits for the one next to him to move, and then he moves, and the guy on the other side of him then notices he's moved, and then he moves in turn. No, they take off as if they had, as it were, one mind, like there's one gull mind. The Taoists would be very sympathetic to that. I mean, again, I don't know the science here enough to know whether this is something you can actually show with slow motion photography, but they would certainly agree if you study creatures in nature, you'll see that their movement has a kind of harmony about it, which we need, which we aspire to, which human beings lack, and which we need to somehow copy or imitate if we can. All right, the second dimension, school, movement, whatever you want to call it, of Taoism, we call religious Taoism. And as I said, in Paths of Return, it's called that primarily because the practices of the religious Taoist look most like the practices of the scholars in the West who studied these religions initially and said, hey, that's kind of like what we do in Christianity or Islam or Judaism or something like that. Hence it's called religious Taoism. It has a whole pantheon of gods and goddesses, not as large as we found in Hinduism, certainly, but still quite numerous. Many Taoists focus their devotion and worship on a trinity of deities. We call them the pure ones. And like the gods of Hinduism, they're understood to express different qualities, different attributes, powers of the supreme reality, which, of course, in this case is Tao. It's not Brahman, it's Tao. You wouldn't be mistaken in seeing here a certain analogy with Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva in the Hindu tradition. Anyway, there's a wide variety of ceremonies, rituals that are conducted by Taoist priests in order to appeal to these gods and tap into the forces that they embody. Healing rituals, exorcisms, intercessions, purification rites, and so forth. The names of the pure ones, left to right, are Yu Jing, that means the jade pure one, Tai Jing, which means the grand pure one, and then on the right, Shang Jing, which means the supreme pure one. And they're often symbolized by three old men sitting, as you see them here, on these sort of celestial thrones. As I said in Paths of Return, again, the school is called religious basically because the practices of this particular school look like Western religious practice. But it would be a really big mistake to suppose that the other two schools aren't religious. Really, instead, our understanding of what constitutes a religion really needs to be flexible enough to accommodate a variety of expressions and adaptations, including, in this case, in the case of Taoism, both the philosophical school and then the yogic school. Well, I skipped a slide here. Here's a gate at a Taoist temple, the White Cloud Taoist temple in Beijing, just to give you a little visual imagery here also concerning the religious practice of Taoism. But then on to yogic Taoism. This is a branch of the tradition, as I said in, and again, Paths of Return, that concentrates on trying to get in harmony with, trying to get some kind of intuitive connection with the physiological power of the body itself. As in the case of yoga in Hinduism, a lot of attention is paid to posture, to various breathing exercises, to an attempt to, again, engage the deep, deep energies within the body. This picture of a person sitting profile, I'm not going to go into all of the details here by any means, but it's meant to show how the different glands of the body, how the regions of the body, the solar plexus, the navel, the sexual center, how they all have different kinds of energy in them. And I guess the energies here are being emblemized by these little balls of fire, these little flaming balls around here. It's meant to say there's a kind of flow, a kind of movement of energy through the body, and we need to learn how to tap into that energy if we want to really be engaged with the Tao and flow like the De. Yogic Taoism is responsible for the increasingly popular, more and more used Chinese alternative medicines, including acupuncture, acupressure, Qigong. And yogic Taoism is also at the root, the foundation historically, of various Oriental martial arts, including primarily Tai Chi Chuan. I'm going to be recommending you take a look at a little video clip in this module where you'll see someone engaged in the practice of Tai Chi. So that's the yogic dimension of Taoism. All right. All of these schools, all of these aspects, dimensions, denominations, you could even say, I guess, of Taoism, they're all concerned with learning how to practice Wei, Wu-Wei. Chinese phrase, as I explained in the reading already, which means literally act, not act. Wei is act, Wu is a negative, like our word not, and then act again. Act, not act. So Wei Wu Wei could be translated as action without action, action not action, as motionless movement, dynamic quietude. Somebody has said a little more creatively, creative letting be is what Wei Wu involves. Now, admittedly, obviously, these are all paradoxes. How do you move without moving? How do you act without acting? How can you be dynamically quiet? Does that dynamism entail a certain, well, whatever, hustle and bustle? How can you do that and just be quiet? Yeah, it's all paradoxical. And that's part of the beauty, part of the mystery, part of the elusiveness of the Taoist tradition, that it's asking us to do something which the rational brain says, that doesn't make any sense. And the Taoist says, you're right. It doesn't make any sense if you look at this rationally. Quoting from the Tao Te Ching, the softest of all things overrides the hardest of all things. Only nothing can enter into no space. Hence, I know the advantages of non-ado. Wu-Wei. Few things under heaven are as instructive as the lessons of silence, or as beneficial as the fruits of non-ado, action not action, motionless movement, Wei Wu-Wei. Do you remember I pointed out in Paths of Return, non-ado, acting without acting, is essentially the activity equivalent of silence. What is silence? Silence is not talking. Now, we all know perfectly well that sometimes silence communicates. Sometimes when somebody doesn't say something, that itself speaks volumes, right? We know that. A look on someone's face without their speaking can sometimes tell us what's actually in their mind. The silence itself is deafening sometimes, depending on the relationship and the context it might be. Well, Wei Wu-Wei is the, the bodily equivalent of silence vis-a-vis speech. It does something, but it does it without doing in the usual way. And it overcomes, it's strong, it contains extraordinary power, this non-acting acting. They compare it, Wei Wu-Wei, as you know from the reading, to how a willow behaves in a storm. What's it do? It bends. It doesn't try to stand up. It just, yields, and that's where its strength comes from. Comparison also to the hub of a wheel. As the wheel turns round and round and round and round, the hub is just still. But the movement of the wheel depends on the non-movement of the hub. Water is a very, very frequent analogy for how Wei Wu-Wei is operating. Water not concerned about competing with the container it's in. It just accepts the contours of the container. It's soft, it's yielding. It doesn't try to do, right? It just is. But in its isness, it has extraordinary power, the power of water to erode a hole in a very hard rock, as I said. I didn't mention this analogy, or story, actually. Fisherman's line, I've got that down here too. The story is told of a Taoist fisherman whose line never broke. And it was the envy of all the other fishermen. And he said, they all said to him, well, how do you manage that? How come your line never breaks when you're fishing? And his answer was, my line is uniformly weak at every point. Its strength lies in the uniformity of its weakness. And since it's uniformly weak, equally weak at all points, it has no weakest point. And it's always at the weakest point, right, that something breaks. So his line never broke. It had no weakest spot. It was weak all the way through. The Luke quotation from the Gospel of Luke, just reminding you also, I said, from a Taoist point of view, Jesus was apparently a Taoist master because he knew how to enter into no space. According to the Gospel of Luke, he preached a sermon in the synagogue in Nazareth where he grew up, and he applied the text to himself, and he said, the Spirit of God is upon me. And all of the people in the synagogue were in an uproar. Who was this, upstart character? Who did he think he was? And they got so incensed. They pulled him out and took him out to the brow of a hill to throw him over the hill. And Luke just says, in a very, very understated way, he passed through the midst of them and went away. And you can sort of go, where did he go? How did he get through there? Where'd that guy go anyway? Well, he's a Taoist. He knew how to move through no space. All right, and then, coming now to the end of this talk, the Yin-Yang symbol. Very, very important emblem for Taoism. Communicating to us here visually the idea of everything in the universe being a combination of reciprocal opposites. Reciprocal in as much as they depend on each other, but opposites in as much as they're in some way opposed to each other. We've got the white fish with the black eye, the black fish here with the white eye, swimming, as it were, into each other. The yin part of the yin-yang symbol, the dark half of that fish, the dark fish with the white eye, symbolizes, expresses responsiveness, darkness, silence, the earth, the feminine. In terms of atomic structure, the electron. Adding this, I didn't mention this, I don't think, in Paths of Return, a minor key of music, a music set in a minor key. Yang, the complementary opposite, is initiative rather than responsiveness, light over against darkness, sound, not silence, the sky, not earth, the masculine, distinct from the feminine, the proton in the atom, the positive charged particle, against the electron, and a major key rather than a minor key. These things work together, the Taoists say. All of this, though they seem to be opposites, need, as it were, each other. Hence again, the black with the white and the white with the black. There's a bit of each inside of the other as they swim and they harmonize and they unify here in the cosmos. There are implications, very, very important implications, for what a religious thinker calls a theodicy. See that word right here? A theodicy is any attempt to explain why there is evil and suffering and death in the world. The Taoist answer to that question, why is there evil? Why is there suffering? Why do people get sick and so forth? The Taoist answer, and it may not at first be a satisfying answer, is that evil is itself a necessary correlative, opposite to the good. That what we call good and what we call bad work together for our ultimate benefit. Good and bad, though they seem to be opposites, actually, in fact, work together for an ultimate or supreme good. I've got a quotation here, first, from a Christian saint, once again, Dionysius the Areopagite, lived around 500 A.D., who in his mystical theology said, and I quote, "The cause of all things," now what would that be for a Christian? God, right? The cause of all things is God for a Christian like St. Dionysius. So, God, the cause of all things, is revealed in its naked truth. So God is seen, revealed, expressed as he actually is in himself to who? Those alone who can pass right through the opposition between fair and foul. That's got a Taoist sort of ring to it too. You have to realize that the opposition between fair, foul, good, bad, up, down, I like it, I don't like it, pleasure and pain, joy and sadness, you have to realize that that opposition itself reveals something that actually goes beyond the opposition, in some way includes both of the opposite poles in itself, and yet unifies them on a higher level. All right. A good Taoist idea. I'll finish up, I promised, a story. Finishing up with a story, in fact, about a Taoist farmer on this whole question of what's actually good and what's actually bad. Check this out and see whether this resonates with what I've been saying. There was a farmer, the Chinese say, who had 6 wonderful horses, stallions, beautiful beasts, which were the envy of all his neighbors. But one night there was a storm, and the winds came, and they blew down the fence, and they knocked down the gate, and all of these prize stallions escaped in the night. And the next morning the corral was empty. And all these neighbors came over and said to this farmer, "Oh, that's too bad. What a shame, you lost all your horses." And the farmer said, "Who knows what's good and what's bad?" Next day, according to the story, all the stallions came back, and with them they brought 6 more, even more wonderful horses. And the farmer's herd of horses was doubled now. And all the neighbors came over and said, "Oh, well, that's really wonderful. What a great thing for you. We're so happy for you." Of course, they really weren't. And the farmer said, "Who knows what's good and what's bad?" Next day, the farmer's son went out and tried to break one of these wild stallions that had come back to the farm. Got on the horse's back, trying to break it, was thrown. The horse bucked. The son was thrown off its back, landed on the ground, and broke his leg. And all the neighbors came over and said, "Wow, what a shame. Too bad for your son." And the farmer just smiled and said, "Who knows what's good and what's bad?" Next day, the conscription officers came from the emperor, drafting young men for the army. They had to go off to war. But they took one look at this kid, the son of the farmer, saw him there lying in bed with presumably a cast on his leg, and they said, "Oh, well, you don't have to go. And all the neighbors came over and said, oh, that's great. Your son doesn't have to go off to the war. What a wonderful thing. And the farmer said, same smile on his face, who knows what's good and what's bad? Well, it's that kind of peace of heart, that kind of indifference, that kind of willingness to accept whatever comes, whether we call it good or whether we call it bad, whether we like it or whether we don't like it, whatever, a kind of detachment from that and a realization that the truth, the real meaning of things, the ultimate principle, the Tao, goes beyond these seeming oppositions and conflicts in life. Well, try that out. Think about that. Ponder whether you could be as detached as this farmer as you go through your day-to-day, when there are going to be some good things and bad things as well. Try a little Taoism.